From the studios of the Republic Media Network, you're watching Arnab Goswami live on The Debate.
Arnab Goswami on The Debate at 9. Presented by Amity University. Powered by RP Sanjeev Goenka Group and Sarah.
Good evening and welcome, ladies and gentlemen. It's good to see you once again. Now, through the day, Republic Global has been broadcasting live the India Global Forum from our studios in London, in the UK, and in India. And we have been absolutely delighted to bring to our screen the most influential names in London and across India, with top cabinet ministers in both the UK and India commenting on a host of issues, a host of subjects through the whole day. The session that really got me thinking was the one which I had the pleasure of hosting, featuring a man very often in the news these days, India's Law and IT Minister Ravi Shankar Prasad. I'll be playing a clip of that conversation in some time to kick off tonight's first debate. But here is both the news point and the question that emerges. Twitter, which brings itself more and more ridicule in India every day, with its patently anti-Indian stance, with its defiantly anti-India stance, has now been booked for putting child sexual abuse material on its platform. This American company, Twitter, wants to teach us democracy. So I asked them tonight, how does child pornographic material Twitter allegedly get hosted? How does child pornography get made available so freely on Twitter? How is pornography Twitter and child pornography Twitter and child abuse Twitter freely available on Twitter, as is being alleged? Is it in the same way that fake news and fake hate videos and fake videos run by blue tick fake journalists who fabricate and amplify lies that Muslims are being assaulted by mobsters shouting Jai Shri Ram, that these mobsters shouting Jai Shri Ram are all over on the loose in our country assaulting Muslims? Is this kind of fake news being put out in the same way that child pornography is being put out on Twitter? Is child pornography available on Twitter in the same manner as these hate videos have found their way on this social media platform? And viewers, let me expand further. Are hate videos and videos of child sexual abuse available on Twitter in the same way that faked and fabricated maps of India are freely circulated on Twitter? In the same way that people with blue tick handles on Twitter are allowed to publish fake news talking about mutinies in the Indian army and propaganda that hurts Indian national interest, which gets carried day after day after day on the irresponsible platform called Twitter? More importantly, viewers, and this is the question that Twitter must be made to answer. More importantly, does Twitter's traffic benefit because child pornography and child sexual abuse and fake hate videos and fabricated maps are carried on its platform? whether by 1% or 0.01% or 0.001%. Does Twitter's traffic increase when this kind of despicable material is freely carried on this platform? And therefore, if its traffic does increase, and this is the operational question, then are we to assume that Twitter in a way commercializes and monetizes such perverse material? Now, these are tough questions. And please understand, Twitter, you're going to be asked these questions in the United States of America, in the United Kingdom, and certainly in India. You will be made to ask these questions because that mask that covers your hypocrisy will have to be taken off. Viewers, Twitter cannot get away. It has to comply or get out. It's as simple as that. As simple as that. Debate number 1 tonight. Also featuring my conversation this evening with Ravi Shankar Prasad from the India Global Forum. We're drawing the line and how. I had the pleasure of speaking to Ravi Shankar Prasad in that unfiltered conversation. And debate number 2 this evening. On debate number 2, desperate after Pakistani terrorists eliminated and an all-out integration in Kashmir, Pakistan sends its drones on Indian soil. Are they ready for the high-tech Indian impact response that we are going to be coming back with? The big India-Pakistan debate at 10 p.m. And here are the headlines this Wednesday evening on the Debate Tonight. IT Minister speaks out for the first time since the Twitter controversy only on Republic at the Indian Global Forum makes it clear that India will assert its digital sovereignty. Also at the India Global Forum, Foreign Minister Jaishankar calls out big tech, asks where is the responsibility, makes it clear non-state actors cannot decide India's policy. As India takes a strong position on demanding accountability from big tech at the Global Forum, hands-off approach of platforms just won't cut it anymore. Swarms of drones after swarms of terrorists, Pakistan changes tactics, cowardice the consistency, but let it be known, an Indian with precision counter-strike is coming. And Prime Minister briefed by the Raksha Mantri after Pakistan's drone provocation. The NSA Home Minister all set to give clearance to a comprehensive drone policy. And more from the India Global Forum tomorrow and this weekend. From Johannesburg, I am joined by digital expert Dirk Wizzer. Thank you very much, Dirk. From London, I'm joined by Anders Kaur, publisher of the Journal of Political Risk. Ravi Batra, an eminent attorney and chair of the National Advisory Council for South Asia Affairs. From New York tonight, Mayank Bidawakta, who's co-founder and CEO of the Coup app, very, very popular, viral Coup app. Abhijit Iyer Mitra, well-known writer, and Gaurav Bhatia, national spokesperson of the BJP and senior advocate. I'd like to begin, by putting this both to you, Ravi, if you can hear me, and Gaurav. And my simple question to you, Ravi, at the start is, I can see you there. How can a company like Twitter say we won't obey Indian law? How arrogant is that? How foolhardy is that? Can you hear me, Ravi? Can you hear me, Ravi?
Yes, I can. Say that again.
Yeah, I'm saying, can Twitter say in America we will not follow US federal laws?
No, they cannot. They cannot. As long as the laws are constitutional, they must follow them.
And who decides if the laws are constitutional in America, please?
Federal judges who have the last word.
Yes. Yes. So the laws in India are constitutional. The laws have been passed by lawmakers.
Absolutely.
Right? The laws are not under review. So how does a company like Twitter say we won't follow the rules in India and virtually cock a snook at the Indian government. I'm just appalled at its behavior.
Well, I think that if Twitter has brought a lawsuit, that is an act of respect for Indian laws and Indian judiciary. And at the end of the day, Twitter will find out that Indian laws apply in India as the Indian judiciary says it means. Just like in the European Union, there's a right to forget that was created about 10 years ago, which does not exist in the United States, but it exists in the European Union. So Indian sovereignty equals Indian laws as the Indian judiciary says it is. And the world, frankly, will be a patchwork of sovereignty as it is defined by that country's judiciary.
I'm glad you've made it amply clear. So then the follow-up question here is that if you've seen the kind of alleged commercialization of depraved content, let me put another example here. Gaurav Bhatia, I think you heard Ravi Shankar Prasad, put his views very, very cogently at the India Global Forum. I think Twitter has taken it too far, and it's made all kinds of, a platform that is allegedly putting out child pornography is using the argument of freedom of expression. I cannot find anything more hypocritical than that, Gaurav.
Absolutely. And to my friend Ravi, speaking from New York, I would second what he says because he's speaking like a lawyer, someone who understands and respects the law and the constitution of our country. And to Ravi ji and to the other panelists, Arnab, imagine, say if Twitter would have shown Alaska to be part of Russia, just the way it did earlier when it showed Leh to be part of China. What would happen in the US if California was shown as a separate country altogether? Would it not hurt the sentiments of the American? Would Twitter be allowed to operate overlooking the Constitution of the US? In the same manner, the Constitution of India, which has been given to our country by the people of the country, it starts with the words, "we the people." So Twitter may have its own internal rules, but those rules have to be subservient to the constitution of our country, also to the rules that have been framed. Now, you very validly raised a point. Can there be complete control? And Arnab, in a vibrant democracy like India, as Ravi Shankar Prasad ji said, India and the government will never endeavor to have complete control. But then let us ask ourselves, can there be complete freedom? No restriction? No regulation? If child pornography exists on the platform of X company, not just Twitter, would Indian government, which is accountable to the people of our country, not take any action? If there is a terrorist who's trying to have a plan against our country, have a terrorist, attack, will the government not command Twitter or any other company to share the information to save the lives of the citizens?
Yes.
And I must say,
yes,
it is a duty to protect the integrity of India as well as the dignity of our citizens.
Yes, but sweeping comments are often made, and Anders and Dirk, I'd like to bring you in on this. That sometimes you make a very good point, but you use a terrible example. And this is exactly what Twitter is doing here in India. At every available opportunity, Dirk, Twitter, for example, starts talking about, defending democracy. Now, you can say you defend democracy and free speech, but you cannot say that we will not follow the laws set up by the government of India for being an intermediary. Now, either you are an intermediary or you're a content publisher. If you're an intermediary, the government of India says, then you must follow the intermediary rules which are set up by the government of India. Twitter says nothing doing. It's an assault on our freedom of expression. And then, if you're not an intermediary, then you're going to have to be a content publisher. Then there will be cases against you if you are publishing child pornography or fake hate videos or fake news. Immediately, Twitter starts jumping and saying, listen, we are an intermediary. We're not a content publisher. So you will not take responsibility for the despicable and depraved content that's being put via your platform. And neither will you abide by the intermediary rules. And if anyone asks you in India, what the hell are you doing in this diverse democracy? Then you will say, we'll follow American rules. Now tell me, Doug, does it make sense to you, or is Twitter itself stretching its own sense of democracy a little bit too far?
Okay, so let me put it this way. There is no way in what I'm about to say am I saying that fake news or child pornography or any of that stuff is right and should be on a platform. It should never be on a platform. But let's take it down a little bit here. If I get into my Ford car and I drive out of my gate, drive down the road, and I hit a child, kill the child.
Yeah.
Is it Ford's responsibility that child was killed, or was it mine? So the platform
Depends upon
itself.
if the brakes worked.
Hi, sorry.
Yes. Ravi was saying something
Okay.
to Doug. No, go on, Doug. Go on. I'm hearing you.
So
I'm hearing you. I'll respond after you finish.
The platform itself is there for users to use. Okay. The users have the responsibility, according to the laws of the land and the policies of the platform, to use the platform responsibly. The platforms need to be held accountable. Don't mistake me. They do need to be held accountable because they're getting too big and they're getting too powerful, and there needs to be some sort of checks and balances. But the onus here is on the user, because the user is technically the content publisher. The platform is not the publisher. The platform is the vehicle for publishing, but it's the user that is making the decision to publish the content. Now, the platform itself should have checks and balances to say, we allow this sort of content, we don't allow this sort of content, and why. It's not just an autocracy where you're not allowed to post anything.
Respond to that, Arnab.
No, Doug, may I? Doug, may I intervene with a simple,
Yes.
very, very elegant, one-line counter to you, if I may, please. And then Abhijit Iyer Mitra will come in. But my answer to that question, and Abhijit will take it over from there, is that you said, is the car company going to be responsible if there's an irresponsible act of reckless driving by the driver? You can't hold the car company responsible. Fantastic point here. Good point, but terrible example, Dirk. And I'll tell you why. If I were to ask you, that car company has to comply with certain safety norms. It has to have a braking system that works, right?
Exactly.
And it has to, before it is allowed to put the car on the roads or sell a car, it has to comply with safety norms. Now, if the car company says we comply by safety norms, but is found not to be complying by safety norms, that car wouldn't be in the road in the first place. So before you can sell a car in India, the American car company that you mentioned will have to ensure it complies by Indian rules. Now Twitter, by example, says, no, we are an American car company. We don't give a damn for Indian rules. And if the American car company says, well, you may be driving on the left-hand side of the road in India, but we don't in America, Indian rules be damned. Would it work? It won't work, because the car has to be driven in India in a certain legal and cultural context. Abhijit, you want to take it forward from there?
Yep, absolutely, Arnab. So, see, the point here is simple. Forget the basic construction of the car and failed brakes and all of that. Assume the driver in Dirk's example is drunk. All right. Now,
Okay.
Ford can't take responsibility for a drunk driver. But what if Ford puts out a statement saying we are basically responsible for drunk drivers? That is what they do with banning people from Twitter. Either you allow everybody to use it, or when you decide to personalize who you ban, you've essentially taken responsibility for that drunk driver. Remember, they hand out certificates of who is inciting violence, who is not. When people were inciting violence in Delhi on Republic Day, they were saying that is not violence. But when Trump had no clear case of inciting violence, he is apparently inciting violence, and they take full-on antitrust cartelized action against him. So I'm sorry, that particular example simply doesn't apply in this case. Remember, even verification. They opened up public verification only for a very short time, for about 1 year in between. Everybody else who has a blue tick is essentially there because they've, climbed the greasy pole with some Twitter executive or the other. There's a certain fact-checking website whose employees keep getting blue ticks within 2 weeks of joining. Other people have to wait in line for years on end to get blue ticks. So please spare me this thing. They've stopped acting as any kind of, they validate information. A blue tick is an information validation. Saying manipulated media, you are taking responsibility. Labeling things as manipulated media or incorrect content. You yourself, nobody has imposed that responsibility on you. Remember, we wouldn't be in this situation if they said, look, we're not banning any content, we're not marking any manipulated or false media. They themselves chose this. They took on a legal undertaking. So remember,
so
when
we're
you
removing
ban
the burden
people,
of proof
when
on the
Twitter
user.
bans people, excuse me, Dirk, I have
Yes,
to
Dirk.
speak
No,
here.
Dirk is countering. I allow the counter. I allow the counter. Abhijit, I allow the counter. I allow the counter. Yes, Dirk, what's your counter?
I'm saying, are we removing the burden of proof on the user and completely villainizing the platform? Because now we're saying, okay, well, it's all the platform's fault, and the user has got they can use the platform. They're not at fault for posting this stuff. It's all Twitter. I just want to gain clarity here.
The user isn't marking things as manipulated information. The user isn't marking it as false information. Twitter is. That's how Twitter works. I don't know if you're familiar with Twitter, but if Twitter takes responsibility for marking things as manipulated or false.
Abhijit, I'd like to bring in Anders Kaur also from London who's been listening very patiently into this discussion. Anders, this event that we were hosting today on Republic was actually out of London, and we had a wonderful time hosting Priti Patel and Rishi Sunak and the Indian Foreign Minister, and there was a session where Tony Blair was there with the Indian Foreign Minister, and that's where this issue also came up on how big tech will have to be handled. Now, Anders, this is a global debate. Eventually, I believe it will have to be met with by a multinational global response. My specific question to you is this, and this is where I come from. When the unfortunate incident happened in Capitol Hill, then everybody said that this is an insurrection against democracy. This is a violation of democratic values. And this was not just an act of vandalism, it was like an act of terrorism. And that the social media companies took off Donald Trump and many of his supporters from their platforms for a long time. However, Anders, in India, this January, there was something much worse, where you had a group of vandals vandalize one of the greatest public places where the Indian tricolor is unfurled on every Independence Day, the 15th of August in India, where policemen were beaten up, thrashed, where women police constables were assaulted by these vandals. And a large part of this was actually being allowed and amplified in a build-up to this ghastly event on Twitter. Now, till date, Twitter has not voluntarily taken action after this incident. So my question is, Anders, sometimes I feel that there are dual standards for companies like Twitter based upon where these incidents happen. Would you agree? And that's where we need to caution Twitter against preaching the rules of democracy in inappropriate contexts. Anders, over to you.
Well, I definitely think that Twitter has overstepped what it can do. It's bitten off more than it can chew in terms of attempts at regulating speech across the world in 190 countries, each of which is going to have very different cultural standards, very different needs in terms of where speech can or should, or where the democracy in that country wants to limit speech. I have very little sympathy, of course, for a country like China or Russia that wants to limit speech or close off its internet to the world. And I think that if Twitter can get in there and get information flowing in places like China and Russia, that's good. But in a democracy, the rules are completely different. And the reason is that, as the minister said, Mr. Prasad, that Twitter can't act as a regulator. And if they try to act as a regulator, they will be slapped on the wrist by the government. And I think that part of what's happening here is that, and the focus on Twitter and the anger about Twitter is that it has tried to regulate essentially governmental speech in a democracy. And I just don't think that it can really do that. I think that Twitter is going to have to allow government ministers, presidents, prime ministers to have their voice without a negative mark put on it arbitrarily by a corporation. First of all, that's foreign. But any corporation really shouldn't be able to regulate the speech of government democratically elected officials. Now, that said, I will say that I do think that, as far as I know, this is really more of a question to the panel, which is highly knowledgeable about this more than I am. But I would question whether, I think that Twitter has attempted, for example, to take down pornography, has made a good effort to try to do that. I don't think there's really a difference between India and America or India and Twitter on this issue. And I'd be interested to hear what you guys have to say about it.
Well, I'd like to bring in Mayank on this. I have another point to add here. Does Twitter benefit commercially from the presence of pornography? Does Twitter benefit commercially from the presence of child pornography and child sexual abuse or fabricated fake news? Because it has been observed by many people that most unfortunately, these are the categories that drive a lot of traffic. So Mayank, Mayank is the co-founder of the very, very successful Rage in India, the coup app. Do these questions occur to you, Mayank? You run an alternative to Twitter. Do these questions occur to you?
Yeah, I think that, the crux of the annoyance that all of us face is the fact that
Louder.
Platforms are supposed to behave in a certain way. And today they're not behaving like that. They're supposed to act like intermediaries, which means they're not supposed to judge the content put out by people. They're supposed to abide by the laws of the land because they're delivering a public good. And any public good needs to be operational within certain guidelines, right?
Yeah.
Today, that's not happening. So you want the advantages of the protection of an intermediary, but you want to behave like a publisher. You don't want to abide by the transparency that's required. You want to act like a judge yourself. I think these are the issues, right? You cannot have certain benefits unless you comply with the laws of the land. I cannot imagine any Indian company flouting a law in any other country, right?
Yeah.
We have so many Indian companies operational in multiple other countries. I can't imagine us doing something like that. I can't imagine Twitter doing the same thing in its own country, right?
No,
so
it couldn't.
I think these are,
couldn't.
Yes, these are some of the issues. And, frankly, you can't choose the laws that you want to abide by. The law is the law.
Yeah.
It works for everybody. So it's as simple as that.
No, I mean, that's the point. And that is where I'd like to go back to Gaurav Bhatia, who Dirk, Ravi, and Anders, as you may know, is the national spokesperson of India's ruling party, the BJP, and a very well-known Supreme Court senior advocate. Gaurav, what are you waiting for? I said yesterday on my program, Twitter would never be able to do 1% of what it's doing in India and the USA. You've got to block them. Let them then come to the negotiating table. You throw the law back at them, or they close their operations. What's holding you back, Gaurav?
I will definitely answer your question, but just let me respond to my friend Mr. Dirk Visser.
Yeah,
Dirk, I must tell you certain facts which are very important. India is a very robust democracy, and we don't need to learn our lessons from any private entity. You said that Twitter is not the publisher. Absolutely. But are you aware that the rules that have been brought in by the government actually provides the intermediary status to a company? But Twitter decides not to comply with it within the 90-day time frame that was given to it. Why didn't it comply? Second, the High Court is the state highest court, decides to not stay the rules. So they have to comply with it. Our judiciary is also very well respected around the world. And third, let me make it very clear, just like they will abide by the laws of the US. And let me give you an example of Germany. Germany has this law called the Network Enforcement Act, where they can mandatorily designate an individual, and if the company refuses to comply with the law, they can authorize blockage of the post as well as fine them up to 50 million euros. Now tell me, is it fair on Twitter's part to say that we will comply with the law in Germany? In the US, we'll abide by the constitution. But in India, when we are operating, we won't respect the law. You will have to go by the US law. What about the sovereignty of our country? Why should we go by the law of the US? Tomorrow, Twitter will come and
let
say
Dirk respond.
that you will go by the law of Nigeria.
Since we have only 2 minutes left on the debate, I'd like Dirk to come in. Dirk, now this is the situation. The company says, to hell with Indian laws. In the world's largest democracy, Twitter says, to hell with Indian laws. We will not follow the IT rules. We will not follow the intermediary rules. Then we ask them, they say, we are a rule unto ourselves.
And listen, I completely get the context. And the Indian people need to be looked after, and the companies need to abide to the laws of the land. And that's what I was saying earlier, that these social media platforms have gotten too big, that there need to be regulations and checks and balances. What I think we need to be careful of here is placing blame on where the content is coming from, whether it's the user or the platform. Absolutely, the platforms need to be regulated and they need to abide. But we need to make sure that if people are using the platform, that they are being held accountable. Because if Twitter then agrees to follow the democratic process within India, then it's on the user and the government to make sure that if there are, for example, child pornography things being posted, that those people are being prosecuted.
Well, I think through a period of their initial growth,
protection was there.
Arnab, can I?
Twitter is not getting it because they did not comply with the rules.
Okay, Ravi wants to come in from New York for a minute. Ravi.
Yeah, Section 230 of our federal law gave immunity to the tech companies, which I believe to be unconstitutional because nobody should be above the law, and they're now immune to liability. But at maximum, that's an American law that has no binding effect on India or China or the European Union. So each country has the right to say in its airspace, these are the laws of the land. And if a country goes too far, as Hitler's Germany did with the Nuremberg laws, then after an appropriate war, the laws are changed. But absent Hitler's Nuremberg laws issue, India has full rights, as does any other country, to say this is what the law of the land is, and you've got to follow it. And I'm telling you that even in the United States, we have a problem because no one's above the law, and yet Section 230 gave these high-tech companies the immunity from liability, which no media company has. when they are actually acting as a media company and profiting and destroying other media companies. So there's something very wrong here. This is a law with birth defects that needs to be put to bed.
Well, I tell you one thing, Ravi. I've had many legal experts examine the new rules here in India, and they say they are cutting edge. If Twitter wants to be treated as an intermediary, it needs to follow these rules. And the point here is, if everyone follows the rules, you see, we are a content publisher. I am liable to Indian rules, and I proudly will follow them. I see no reason for exceptions. But gentlemen, this has been a very interesting conversation. So I do find that whether in South Africa, New York, London, Bengaluru, or Delhi, there is a broad consensus that is emerging. I have enjoyed this conversation. Look forward to talking to you again. And Twitter, follow the rules if you want to operate in India. Coming up on the other side this evening, talking of countries or companies that will never comply, ladies and gentlemen, never comply. Desperate times call for desperate measures. No one knows that better than Pakistan. Sources say that Islamabad and Rawalpindi are nervously pacing about the democratic process winning in Kashmir. They are so unhappy. They are fixed. They don't know what to do because 370 is gone. We are going to have fantastic elections in Kashmir, maximum participation of the people, so much prosperity. Pakistan thought that out of their frustration, they will hover some explosive-laden drones, send them across to our soil. 3 drones have already been intercepted. Unbeatable anti-drone technology, ladies and gentlemen, is being placed across the entire border. The Prime Minister has done a review with the Raksha Mantri. But what Pakistan should huddle about and discuss in Rawalpindi today is which bunker their generals will hide in across the border when we hit them back with another ultra-precision surgical strike. We debate Pakistan's latest provocation and how we will respond and should respond after the break.